Storey Time with Stephanie Storey.
Hi, I am art historical novelist Stephanie Storey, and this is Storey Time. My guest today is a professor of writing and literature at LA Valley College, which was just down the street from my house when I lived in Los Angeles. She is also the author of The Greek Persuasion, which has been out for 1 year. We're going to talk about what that year has been like. Welcome to the show, Kimberly Robeson. I just fumbled over your name. I'm very sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Hello, Stephanie, and hello to your Story Time. I'm so excited to do this, and I am just honored to be here because it's my 1 year anniversary of my novel coming up on April 30th. And it's just so fun after some of the hoopla and all the celebration starts to die out to be able to speak with someone about my novel. It's just a wonderful thing that you're doing for me today. So I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, yay. I'm really happy to have you. I was going to go right to that, but we have to set up sort of a little bit about what the book's about before I start asking you about what this year has been like. Yes. So this is a novel. Your protagonist heads off to Greece in search of what her love story is going to be and how she's going to choose her love life. And she ends up exploring the lives of her mother and her grandmother along the way. What made you specifically write about 3 different generations of women?
Okay, so I think I've had this novel in my head probably since 98, since 1998. I was laying in bed with my Greek yaya, and she started telling me this story about being on the assembly line in Egypt during World War II, and she would clean the headlights of the Jeeps. And I thought to myself, I just thought you were a wife, you were Papu's wife, and it was so interesting for me to hear that this grandmother of mine had this really interesting life. She worked on an assembly line. It was the first I had heard about it. And so I went and I wrote this short story, I think in one of my classes I was taking at a time just for pleasure, a writing class for pleasure. And then I reached my own time in my life. I'm Greek American. My mother is Greek and my father is from Ohio and from the US. And so I've been pulled sort of between countries and between places. And when I myself was 30 years old, I started thinking about that story about my grandmother. And I thought, what sort of place do women have in this world when they don't get married and they don't have children? And I've been blessed with 2 best friends, 2 very close friends. And one of them is not married, and her life is full of adventure and curiosity. And the other one is married but has no children. So it's a different life. You know, you look at pictures, and when you have children and you see your children getting older and they have their milestones. But when you don't have that in your life, you know, your milestones are your last vacation to Tahiti or to Jordan. It's sort of this sort of thing. So I really wanted to show what a contemporary woman's life would look like if she chose not to have children, and if she hadn't met someone special in her life to complement her life, but she was also very content with her space in the world because she was a professional, etc. And I thought it would be really interesting to juxtapose it with 2 other generations. And so that was sort of the foundation of the story. That's how it all started. I started with what I know. So I made her Greek American. I made her to have a grandmother that, worked in World War II. But unlike my real grandmother who worked on Jeep headlights, in the character, I wanted her to be sort of like this 60s sexy sort of movie actress. So I had her sort of in this checkered shirt, and she would roll under the Jeeps and clean the oil and get out all dirty. And so that's kind of where my imagination took off. And so, but ultimately, Thayer Milopoulos Wright takes off on her own life and has a lot of different adventures, a lot of relationships that I've never had. So it's a search for love. It's a search for wholeness. It's a woman's quest to feel important in this world, you know, when at a time when society's telling you you need to be a mother, you need to get married, you need to do all these things. And so that's sort of the impetus of the story. And then I know everyone always tries to find themselves in the book, and one of my favorite anecdotes is my brother always says to me, you know, he was reading my book and he says, you know, where's the brother in this story? I said, there is no brother. You know, in all honesty, men were not a role in my novel. It was a story about women and mothers and that sort of relationship.
Now, you said earlier that you wanted to, one, write what you knew, but you had friends who did not have children. I do not know this about you. Do you have kids? Or do you not?
No, and I'll be very frank. I've been very open about this when I was doing my book readings and in my classes. I actually chose not to have children quite early on. In my late 20s, early 30s, I knew that my role on this earth would be to hopefully be a good role model to my nieces and to affect students' lives and be there for them. But I also knew that I didn't want to be a mom. I kind of knew it. And I have to say, I knew it because I helped do daycare for my niece for 3 years of her life. And it was absolutely rewarding, but it was an eye-opener. You know, when I see moms on the ground playing with kids, like I'm thinking about the next book I want to read, you know. It's like that didn't do that for me. So and so, yes, it's really interesting because many of my closest friends, not just the two I mentioned, but many of my closest friends, we haven't become mothers. And I think we lead really good lives. You know, I think we really, really do. And in fact, I'm reading a book right now that talks about that and choices women make. And I have to add this, which is really interesting. Now, people can ask me about children, but when I was in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s, there was this hesitation, you know, like you know, and it was interesting because some people would say something like, oh, you know, would tell me and my husband, oh, when you have children, you know, your life will be so wonderful. And my husband used to say, okay, it's a dinner party. You don't have to give your philosophies on children right now. You don't need to go there. But it's interesting because I made the choice. What about women who didn't make the choice? You know, what if you really wanted children and couldn't have them? So that's always a sticky situation, you know, to ask, you know, a woman, you know, if she didn't have children. Now at this point in my life, it's not a big deal. But I remember there was a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure in my 20s and my 30s to become a mother from family and friends, and you know, this idea that you haven't lived a complete life unless you're a mother.
So when you started writing this book, did you have questions about yourself or about that choice or that what life was like that you answered, that you got a fresh perspective on by writing this novel? Like, did you get a new look at it through the process of noveling?
I think that's why I wanted to write the novel, is because I had finally in my head felt so comfortable with all my choices, all of them, you know, not settling, not getting married, and being very comfortable personally if I wasn't going to get married. You know, I was happy. I had just bought a beautiful condo at the beach, you know, with support of my mother. I had a great job at a community college teaching English. And so I was really happy, you know, I was genuinely, authentically happy. And then I happened to bump into my husband. And so I think at the point that I was writing the novel, I was no longer questioning my choices. It was more, and I think many of us write these stories and we become writers because we think we have a story to tell that may in fact help someone else out. And that's why I framed it the way, with this character who is similar to me, but also very different than me, because she's still figuring it out. And she goes through this 6 years figuring out where she's at, where I feel like in my own personal life, not that I figured it out, because we never figure it out, okay? But I definitely think there's been a long stretch for me of feeling this comfort and this peace of mind.
The other major part of this book that I really want to talk to you about is the element of Greece, right? Because it's such an important part of this. You're Greek American. Do you remember the first time you actually traveled to Greece, like in the first impressions it made on you, or were you really little?
I actually grew up overseas until I was almost a teenager. And so the chunk of the years I lived were in South Africa, Saudi Arabia. I was actually born in Venezuela, and then we moved to Borneo, and then we went to Atlanta, and then we went to Saudi Arabia. So, and I've also been to probably about 35 countries traveling, just because I have this like voracious appetite for traveling. And so I think Greece for me and has always just been home. It's been home because the US was not home because I didn't live here until I was almost 13. I was 12 when I moved here, a little bit, 12 and a half. And I was in the situation where I was trying to figure out my life in, this suburb in California, this life that I was used to, which was every 4 years, packing your bags and going to a new house and new friends and, just culture, all these experiences. And so from birth until we moved here, I would go to Greece every year. We would go June, July, and August. So it was my home, it was what I see as my home. It was a place where I have my fondest childhood memories. And then when we moved here, it was a little bit more difficult to go back. But at 16, I think it was, I jumped on an airplane by myself and would go every summer again. And then when I graduated from college at 22 with my bachelor's in English, of course, I packed my bags and I moved to Greece. Because everybody used to always say to me, oh, you have this fascination with summertime in Greece and you don't know really how real life is. And so I went and saw how real life was. I lived with my grandmother. I lived with my yaya for the first part. I lived in Athens. I went without a job. I got a job at a frodisterio, which is a language school. And I hit the pavement. I would walk to work in, cold winter nights with my little bag, 22-year-old teaching. So I experienced what it was like. And then I came back about 4 years later because I wanted to pursue my master's degree.
It is really fascinating that you grew up with so many different cultural points of view on the world, moving from different place to place. What do you think it gave you as far as perspective goes? And or do you ever feel like you missed out on something not having just grown up in Greece or just grown up in Venezuela or just grown up in the United States?
Yeah.
What are there positives? Are there negatives? How do you feel about it?
Yeah. So me, if we're talking about me, Kimberly, not the character.
Yeah, you.
I felt like it gave me a lot of interesting perspectives, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The truth of the matter is there's so many wonderful things about living in so many different countries. But there is this feeling of what's home, and I love to talk about Odysseus, Odysseus. I always say, he roamed for 20 years before he came back home, and he didn't matter how many enchantresses and how many goddesses, and how many beds he would like. He always wanted to go back to home, where Penelope was, his island of Ithaca. And I kind of feel like that. I feel like all my life I searched for home. And I will not lie, my favorite city in the entire world is Athens. There is no city like Athens. I mean, Athens is the most vibrant, beautiful city, apart from all the art and the history, which I'm sure you know so much about. But it's just this vibrant city, and it has this spice. And the minute I get off on the airplane, I mean, I'm just smiling. I mean, I'm talking about it right now, and I just smile from ear to ear. I'll probably cry too. But it just has this feeling that is just so wonderful. And I don't know if that's how people feel, like, if an Armenian student of mine goes back to Armenia, or someone who's Italian goes back to Italy, or someone, from Iran goes back. I don't know if they feel that, and maybe they do, but that's what I would equate it to. Maybe it's that feeling of going, quote, home.
Tell me, since I'm not there, I lived in LA for a long time, but I'm not there during the pandemic. Tell me how LA is during the pandemic, and how is it to teach during the pandemic? Like, that's a difficult transition, isn't it?
I think it's really, really hard for students. I think it's really, really, really hard for students. Not everybody's privileged. Not everybody has wireless at home. Not everybody has computers at home. And even if you do have a computer, you might be a family of 5 or 6 who are using one computer. You don't have a beautiful office to just do your homework. So unfortunately, it's really, really hard for many, many students. And as teachers, we're just trying to be there for our students. For example, I'm a teacher who has strict deadlines. And in this type of world, you have to be more flexible. So I'm constantly extending deadlines. I'm constantly reaching out to students, emailing them personally, trying to be in contact with them. Our school, Los Angeles Valley College, for me personally, I worked at 13 different institutions and 28 years of teaching. And that's probably one of the reasons I say I found home. It is the most amazing community college. It's not only physically beautiful, it's been remodeled, and we have all these really cool like 1970s buildings on stilts and day-glow green bathrooms. But we have so many services for students, so many services for students that they can reach out and get help. A couple of things I just heard on the president's message yesterday. I know that we were giving Chromebooks to students who don't have laptops or don't have computers. So you could fill out an application and you could get a Chromebook. And yesterday I just found out, because a student said, when am I supposed to return this Chromebook? Because I'm graduating. And they don't have to return them. They're gifts. They get to keep them. So I think that's really great. I think that's really great, and then the other thing we heard on the president's message too, that it's called the CARE, and there's been $3 million that has been given, and so we're trying to distribute that $3 million CARE. It's a CARE fund, so we're trying to distribute that, and I don't know how admin does it. I'm not admin. I never want to be admin, but they're taking that $3 million and they're trying to have an application process where students can get some funding. So I think our school, I think Los Angeles, I think California, I think we're doing everything right.
One thing I have to ask about, because you got so passionate talking about teaching, where does that passion for teaching and helping your students come from?
Oh, you're going to make me cry again. I don't know if it's when you start getting older, you start getting more emotional about things, but when I was in my 20s, I was a little bit of a tough teacher. And I still have students that I knew from my first community colleges I taught at. But I think the more you see in life, the bigger your heart gets. I hope that that's the natural growth pattern for most people. But I really, my heart goes out to people that are not so privileged and don't have so much. And so I've never dreamed of teaching at a four-year university. It's never been my goal. I've always wanted to be in the community college system because that's, I think, where I can make the biggest difference. And when we leave this earth, we hope we touched a few people along the way. And so I'm just blessed. I have these, I have to say, every classroom is not perfect. And you have students who, are not your biggest fan, and that happens, and that's fine, because I am an emotional person, and I'm sure sometimes people might want someone who's a little bit more strict. And I'm a type A person, so I'm a highly organized teacher. But I have learned through the years to become more compassionate, and I have, just so many wonderful students who reach out to me, 5 years later, 10 years later, and tell me little stories, of Miss Robeson did this and Miss Robeson did that. And, so I don't have the philosophy that you don't smile till Easter. I smile on the first day. And I also say, but, don't confuse my kindness for leniency. I'm not, quote unquote, easy teacher, but I'm also a very fair teacher. And so I think the passion just comes from knowing that maybe you can do something good for someone, and it goes beyond English. My biggest new project is called the Pleasure Book Project. And it actually was started in Peru. I taught in Peru for 6 years. And it was something that I didn't exactly know if I believed in 100%, but now I absolutely believe in it. And that is getting our college students and getting our students in general to read for pleasure. So instead of having one text for the whole class, everybody gets to choose their own text. So everybody gets to choose their own pleasure book, because you can't have a young man, who loves, the Lord of the Flies, or not Lord of the Flies, the more current one, Game of Thrones, reading something that, a young woman in the class might enjoy. And so my goal right now, that's kind of been my project for the last few years, is really get everybody excited about reading, because there's so many studies that prove that when you read for pleasure, you not only become a better writer, but you become a better student, and there's so many studies that show, what it does to your brain, and not just for writing and thinking, more compassion, you become a more compassionate person, and all your studies, you get better when you're a reader. So, so that's something I've done in my classrooms for the last 7 years. Instead of having one book that we all read, everybody gets to choose their own book. And I help them in their selection based on their personality, based on their age, based on where they're coming from, etc.
I have to know
Okay.
how this first year of being a novelist, because your debut novel came out a year ago, what has met your expectations and what has not? How has it been everything you thought it would be, and how has it not been everything you thought it would be?
Wow, that's a loaded question, Stephanie. I think we'll have to do a whole 1 hour segment on this, and you'll have to share your experiences.
Maybe we'll have to, but okay, so just give a little bit, just give a little teaser, and then maybe we will. Maybe I'll get a group to come back and talk about this.
Yeah, all writers talking about the publishing experience. It's been absolutely wonderful. I had these little goals that I had. And I recently won the Sarton Award for contemporary fiction. Only 4 winners, done by librarians, chosen by librarians. And so the Sarton Award for me was what I had really coveted out of the awards. It was the one that I really wanted, because it was for women. It was named after May Sarton. There was a real clear rubric. I love the fact that there was a rubric. So that was and this just happened a couple days ago. So that was very exciting. I wanted to be on TV. So I got to be on CBS here in LA. And I also have that on my YouTube channel. I wanted to have a beautiful launch. I had a beautiful launch in a new library at my school with 80 students. I had a Greek singer. I had a really good friend of mine, an actor named Adoni Maropis, there too, to introduce me. It was just wonderful. It was just really a great launch. So all those things. I did a reading at Romans. I really wanted to read a Romans, the oldest bookstore in LA. And so all that is really great. But I always say, if you want to write a novel, make sure you're doing it for yourself primarily, because it's tough. It's a very, very tough business, because you are constantly selling yourself. You're constantly saying, please buy my book, please leave a review, have you read it? And then, when someone says, I got your book, and then you never hear from them again. You're like, oh gosh, did they hate it? Are they avoiding me, not saying anything? So especially my first book, because it does have that foundation that a lot of people, are very curious. Oh my gosh, has Kimberly actually done that? And is this true? And is this true? And how does this match up with her life? And, they're all guessing. And so there is a personal connection to this book. It's not like, writing about Raphael, where if people don't like Raphael, that's Raphael. But if people don't like Fair, then people are like, oh, am I then offending, Kimberly? And so there's this really sort of weird thing that happens with friendships and with followers, where you're giving so much of yourself. And I think unless you've taken on the task to write a book and publish it and put it out in the world, you don't realize how reviews not only matter, but also how, if you get a stinking one, it kind of hurts, it feels weird. It feels strange, it's going to live, in its lifetime on these different websites. But I have to say those have been, few and far between. Most of the reception has been really positive. And so, everyone's not going to like the same TV show. Everyone's not going to like the same book. And so I think for me publishing this book, because I did want to put it out there and I'm hoping to do some good with my book. It's been a really, really great experience.
Kimberly, this was lovely. Really, I enjoy you and I enjoy your spirit, and I love that you're out there teaching and achieving the dreams with the noveling. It's such a lovely, lovely thing. So thank you for joining me.
And thank you for your writing and your books. I love them. I love them. I can't wait to read Raphael too. The other one's sitting on my bookshelf and I really enjoyed it. And oh my gosh, it's always such a joy to speak to you. It always is such a joy.
Well, this was lovely. So thank you for joining me here. Maybe we will get together again and talk about the ups and downs of being writers. But until then, everybody, bye-bye. See you next time.
With Stephanie Storey, story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.